If you had to rely on your garden to feed yourself, to feed your family, could you? Or how much of your diet could you actually grow yourself? Now, this is a question that I have been asking myself recently, and I think several other people might be asking themselves the same thing due to fears of recession, food insecurity, food quality. And while I do my best to be an optimist in the long term, in the short term, I would be lying if I wasn't concerned. And for me, when I start to worry, I like to put pen to paper and actually figure out what can I do? What are my options? And that's what this video is about. I have calculated the calories per square foot that you could expect to produce for some of the most common quote unquote survival crops, and then some that you may not routinely think of as survival crops. So let's get into it. My first set of crops are going to be long storage crops. Crops that you can grow and store for months, if not longer. And one that always comes to mind is the humble little potato. I'm starting potatoes today in a few different ways to run some experiments because I love experimenting, but I won't know the results of those experiments for several months. But the potato packs a whole lot of calories per square foot. It comes in at 1,500 to 3,000 calories per square foot by my calculations. At the very end of this video, I'll show a table that lets you know how I calculated all these numbers if you're interested. Now, the potato is great because they can store for a while. Now, I, however, am not really focusing too much on potatoes, even though I'm growing them, because for me, potatoes I can only get to last for maybe 3 months, which is a while, but they're cheap. Currently, you can get potatoes for about 50 cents a pound. So for me, this is not something that I'm going to be focusing on growing a very large volume of. But there's something that is similar to a potato that I will be focusing on. And that would be the sweet potato, which comes in at 650 to 1,300 calories per square foot. Now, these are the sweet potatoes we have left that I grew last year. Still looking great. And growing up, we had sweet potatoes that would last for more than a year. So that's what I'm hoping, that I can grow enough sweet potatoes that by the time I'm harvesting again, I'm just finishing up last year's harvest, because we absolutely love sweet potatoes. I have slips started right now. I've got some more ordered. And for me, they're great because, well, I live in Kentucky, and Kentucky gets very hot and humid, and sweet potatoes love hot and humid weather. So that's why they're very high on my list of survival crops. The next vegetable on my long storage list would be winter squash, which is not what I'm planting right here. I still have a few months before I'm planting my winter squash. But winter squash is great because they store very, very well. But the downside is that they definitely don't have as many calories per square foot as some of the other vegetables I'm going to be talking about. Winter squash only come in at 150 to 300 calories per square foot. That's because, well, squash, especially vining winter squash, take up a lot of space. But what is great about them is that, as I said, they can store for a long time. So last year I grew a squash known as the tromboncino, sometimes called the rampicante, zucchino. It's an Italian long squash. It's goofy looking. I think it looks like if Dr. Seuss made a butternut squash. They're absolutely delicious, and I currently have in my kitchen several of them which I picked over 5 months ago, and they are still totally fine. So that's why they're going to be on my list. Some other varieties to consider would be butternut squash, kombucha squash, Hubbard squash, all great ones to add to your list of survival crops. Next on my list of crops would be corn, but not sweet corn. I'm talking about dent corn, the type of corn that you use for flour, making tortillas, grits, which can store for quite a long time, as long as you keep it dry. Now, corn will produce between 500 to 1,500 calories per square foot. That's depending on the type that you're growing, because some have relatively small ears of corn and some are pretty big. Now, I've grown corn in the past, especially a lot growing up. That was always sweet corn. Here in this garden, I haven't really grown a lot of corn. that's changing this year. We've been experimenting with some masa corn flour and making fresh tortillas, and we're getting better at it. So I want to grow a lot of my own corn. Now, I don't know if it makes that much sense economically. I could probably just buy a big giant bag of unground corn for cheaper, given the time and effort that it takes to put into it. But I like the idea of growing that crop, having it in my kitchen, hanging up, just sort of what it represents of the stability and security of a long storing crop. And it's corn, something that would have been grown here with squash and my next crop, beans. And beans are an interesting one because when times get lean, people always talk about eating rice and beans, and I do love rice and beans. But beans, while they do produce 175 to 500 calories per square foot, don't make a lot of economic sense. A packet of beans, the seeds to plant, will run you between $3 and $4, and you might be lucky to yield about half a pound of beans for the seed packet. Well, for that same amount of money that you could have spent on a seed packet, you could go buy 4 pounds of beans. So maybe think about, buying stuff at the grocery store and storing that as part of your food security plan. But for me, while I still will be growing dried beans in my garden this year, they're not going to be something that I'm relying heavily on. And then if the proverbial manure hits the fan sooner rather than later, those long storage crops, which take time to grow, aren't going to be great. So that's why my next category of crops are fast growing crops that still have a high calorie per square foot rating. And the first one would be kale and collards. These I'm taking outside right now to harden off. I'll be planting them in the ground in a week. And you may be thinking, well, there's not a whole lot of calories in kale. While in each individual leaf there's not a lot of calories, kale can produce a lot and can continue throughout the season if you're in the right climate and you treat it right. That's why kale and collards come in at 150 to 500 calories per square foot, which is a little bit surprising for, a bunch of leaves. I like kale. I know people have mixed opinions on it, but I really do like kale. The next group of crops on my list, which are quick growing crops, but if treated correctly and the right variety, could actually be long storage crops, are turnips, beets, and carrots, which can range in 200 to 500 calories per square foot. They're great because they're quick. Some varieties ready in 45 to 50 days. For your storage carrots, they're going to take a little bit longer, 75, 80, maybe even 90 days. But then if you store them properly, it can last you all winter. Your storage carrots typically are the ones that you're going to be planting late in summer into the fall and then overwintering. And depending where you're at, could even overwinter them in the ground. That's what I have started right here, my spring carrots. And did you know that you can eat the leaves too of all of those crops? You can make a nice pesto with your carrot tops. I love beet greens. And then turnip greens, while maybe not everyone's favorite, if you saute some onions, garlic, maybe a little bit of bacon fat, absolutely delicious. So they are on my list of survival crops that I will be focusing on this year. Back inside in my pantry for my next crop, which you might not think of as a traditional survival crop, and that would be the tomato. Because with a little bit of canning, you can get your tomatoes to last for quite a long time. So it takes a little bit of work. They can be turned into a long storage crop, but tomatoes will produce between 200 to 400 calories per square foot. Now let's walk over here and we can see, oh, there's my squash up there. One of the many. But we've got salsas up here, which are absolutely great. And something like this, has a lot of vitamins and minerals and other things that you may not be getting from if you're just relying on carbohydrate and starchy sources for long-term storage. So salsas like this and tomato sauces are definitely going to be part of my sort of long-term thinking for food stability and security. And I'm about to switch over to a different set of crops that I won't have calculations for. So before I do that, let me show you that table that I promised. I went crop by crop and looked at the space per plant in square feet, looked at several different sources, and then also applied my own experience growing these crops. The yield per plant in grams, again, looking at various resources and then comparing that to my own lived experience. The calories per gram, and then doing a little bit of math to get the calorie range per square foot. Now we're going to do a little bit of walk and talk. Let me know if you don't like shots like this. But so far we've talked about your long storage crops and then your quick growing crops. But if you're thinking longer term, definitely start incorporating more perennial crops onto your property. Now, they can take a while, so you need to start now. In my forested area, I have put a whole lot of hazelnuts. So hazelnuts are a great crop. I have two very large Chinese chestnuts that were on the property when we moved in. Otherwise, it would take a while to get them established. I have a whole lot of oak trees, and you can eat the acorns. White acorns are the most palatable. The bur oak has some nice big ones that some varieties are very low tannin. These are chinkapin oaks, and I've been experimenting with how to process those. One crop that I don't have yet that I really want to add would be some sunchokes. I'm thinking this area that I've cleared through here to put a nice crop of sunchokes. If you're not familiar with sunchoke, it is a type of sunflower, and it makes tubers, underground tubers, that you can dig up and eat. You can store them down there in the fall and the winter, dig them up when you need them. So that is a great survival crop that you always see people talking about, especially in the permaculture communities. And then things like asparagus, maybe not the most calories per square foot, but once you get established, will come up year after year. This bed doesn't look like much, but that's asparagus. Up here, I've been planting native fruit trees. I've got American plum, persimmon, some pawpaw, elderberry. I have blackberries, I have raspberries, I have strawberries, which are kind of perennial. They can get depleted after a while, so you need to make sure that you're moving them and replanting in different areas. And then I have a whole bunch of native flowers that I have been putting on my property, several of which are edible if you know how to cook them. So what would you add to the list of your survival crops? Now, making this video, I was hesitant because I don't like fear-mongering videos, but this is something that I have truly been thinking about myself and planning my garden and talking with my wife. So I thought that others would share the sentiment. And, worst case scenario, we have crops that are delicious, fulfilling, that we can, rely on. Best case scenario, we have a whole bunch of crops which are delicious that we can enjoy. So there's really no downside that I see. This is something that I enjoy doing, being out in my garden, making videos about it. So if you have anything to add, please let me know. Tell me what crops you're going to be growing this year, and I wish you the very best. See you later. Bye.